Chris Spatola covers the NBA, covers college basketball, ESPN, SiriusXM, The Athletic, played at Army, and he joins us to talk a little hoops right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Chris, welcome inside the show. How are you, pal?
Spatola.
I'm good, boys. Good to be with you. How was the holiday? Everybody okay?
We're feeling good.
Doing great, brother.
Happy New Year. And, we're ready to rock this thing. You know, basketball after Christmas really takes center stage. But the football team here in Philly has kind of like the Sixers were like the big story for a while because the Eagles stunk. And now the Eagles have got to push the Sixers off the back burner to the point that even this Butler story I don't think has gotten as much attention because of the Eagles. But, you know, you've played, you've coached. Is this normal that, like, the coach and the players behind closed doors, like, something like this would happen? Or is this story much to do about nothing?
Well, you know, I think it's a combination of the two, which is to say, I think things like this, particularly with Type A, you know, personalities like an Embiid, like a you know, obviously a head coach, be it Brett Brown or anybody who's in that position, and a guy like Jimmy Butler. There's certainly going to be things that go on, especially as a guy like Butler is acclimating and trying to figure his way in within that offense and within that locker room. The other thing, I think it has a lot to do with Jimmy Butler. I mean, he has become a very polarizing figure over the last few years. You know, look, it's no surprise now. It's his third team, and the last two stops did not go well, and it was largely because of Jimmy Butler's attitude and how he handled himself. So I think that probably has a lot to do with it. But it's, you know, I think, look, at the end of the day, boys, and I was saying this the other day on NBA radio, Philly is better with Jimmy Butler. So, you know, I think ultimately you got to figure out exactly how that's going to work. If you are truly committed to, you know, winning the East or competing in the East, you are a better team with Jimmy Butler in the locker room.
Chris, I think in the backdrop of what you're saying, there's the element of this is really the first time that Brett Brown, arguably in his coaching career, has had to deal with someone like Jimmy Butler. And it's not someone in the polarizing surface sense of, hey, this guy, and he speaks his mind, etc. I'm saying as far as a proven top 20 player in the NBA who also has an ego like the other 19 guys on that list. And it's not to say one's right, one's wrong, but I think that there's an adjustment period Brett Brown is having dealing with a player of that caliber and that ego, where normally it's guys who he's almost raised as a coach, even Embiid.
Yeah, you know, this is why you pay coaches in the NBA. It is a players' league, and you pay coaches to manage personalities, manage different personalities. This is why you pay NBA head coaches. And I think what he is figuring out is there is a lot of stuff that comes with having a player of Jimmy Butler's caliber. You know, I have this ratio that I use that, you know, look, the more talented you are, the more distraction that we can deal with, and the more, you know, outward personality we can deal with, the more gripes and complaints we can deal with. The worse you are, the less we're going to be able to deal with that stuff. And the fact of the matter is, if you're going to operate in a world with a Jimmy Butler, who is, you know, he's certainly talented. Now, there are other talented players on that team, but they're young and they're still trying to figure their way out. And there's a likability, I think, and a jovialness to an Embiid where there's an acerbic nature to him, but you can kind of deal with it and in some cases laugh it off. Whereas with Jimmy Butler, he's serious business. And so I think that's, you know, Brett Brown, to your point, it's a really good point. Brett Brown hasn't really had to deal with a guy like that. But again, in this NBA, where stars win, like it basically comes down to, did your stars play better than the other team's stars? And if they did, you're going to win NBA games. You got to have guys like Jimmy Butler.
Who's the most difficult guy you ever dealt with? Talented, I'm sure, but difficult as a coach.
Austin Rivers in his 1 year at Duke, when I was still at Duke. He was tough, and you know, it was kind of the same thing I was just talking about. Like, you know, Austin came into Duke. When we recruited Austin, he was like a high school folk hero. He was a legend. I mean, he was an and-one star. He had a tremendous high school career, and there were a lot of things that he did and got away with in high school that got a lot of likes on social media and made him this folk hero that you just weren't going to be able to do in college. And then when he got to our locker room, some of our guys who had been there, like a Seth Curry being one of them, or I think we still had both Plumlees at the time. Like they didn't have the time of day for a guy like Austin Rivers. So it's kind of the same type of deal in dealing with him. And he was a freshman, a young kid, and so he was probably the toughest that we had to deal with. And then I did USA basketball for 3 years with Coach K as a part of. I had a minimal role, but I was along for all those rides. And again, like part of the reason he had success is he was coaching that USA team different than he did his Duke team. Like there was much more of a management tone. There was much more of okay, what do you need? A give and take. What do you need? All right, this is what we need. Let's come to some sort of an agreement. But there were some guys on that team. When we first started doing that, guys, LeBron was a pain in the ass. Just a real pain. And, he was still at that time young, but there was, he had to kind of be taught, and there had to be a communication that was opened. And so I think it's one of those things that coaches learn over time. But if you're going through it for the first time, it's not easy.
Chris Spatola is with us here, NBA radio, Sirius NBA radio, ESPN, The Athletic, former player at Army. Look, let me ask you, because if you're watching the Sixers and you see Embiid and Simmons and Butler, do you look at square pegs, round hole, or would you be salivating at the opportunity to work with that trio? Because a lot of people are wondering whether these three guys are the right guys. Can they fit together? Because there's not a great jump shooter in the lot of those three. So was this a three that you would love the opportunity to work with, or is this a challenge if you're a coach?
No, I would love it. Look, let's look at this from a macro level, okay? That lineup that they have, Simmons, Embiid, Butler, Redick, and Chandler, have outscored teams. I was looking at the number the other day, have outscored opposing teams by like 17 points per 100 possessions or something like that. The point is, like that big three that you have, with one of the best shooters in the league in J.J. Redick and a forward in Chandler who's, semi-versatile and can do a little bit of everything, is outstanding. Now, the problem that Philly has is that when they go to that bench or guys are out or whatever, like they have struggled and that bench is just not very good. But the point is, I would – look, are there limitations? Are there limitations to what Simmons does? Yes. There are also a lot of things he does that there aren't a lot of guys who do. I think you have to have a guy like Butler in order to win in the league, a guy who plays on both sides, a guy who late in the shot clock or late in the game, as you guys have seen already, can go get his own shot and can make big shots. And then Embiid is a future Hall of Famer. So, like those three you can work with. It's a matter of, look, these guys, if you talk to pro guys, they're constantly going to talk about where they're getting their shots from, when they're getting their shots, and how many in a series. Like pro players are constantly talking about being in a rhythm, like being in a sweat is what they call it. And so, like that's when Jimmy Butler comes from Minnesota, which was a debacle, obviously. Like I take it as, is he tough to deal with? Yes, but I take it as Jimmy Butler trying to figure out the best way that he can be successful, which he ultimately believes is going to make Philly win. And so I think it ultimately comes from a decent place. But yeah, that big three you have has been exceptional. If you look at it from a macro level, it's just when we get into the weeds of the stuff in the locker room and then you start getting into all that, then you say, okay, well, are there bigger issues here?
If you're coaching Ben Simmons, how do you convince him to have some confidence in just trying to take a shot? Is that not the right way to go about it, or do you just back off of him, or do you say, look, I want you to take 2 to 3 shots a game, and I don't care if they go. Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think, look, it's different with pros. Like, if you're dealing with a college kid, I think you're much more coming from the standpoint of, yes, I want you to take this number of those types of shots, and I'm okay with you missing, right? If you're going to be okay with a guy taking a shot, you got to be okay with a guy missing a shot. In the case of Simmons, I think it has to come down to scheme and to the point where you're putting him in situations where they are shots he's comfortable taking. The NBA has become such a scrutinized league. It has become such a social media-dominated league that guys are gun-shy. Guys who aren't capable of doing certain things, they become gun-shy. I don't know, and this is something, again, that we've talked about a lot on NBA radio shows I've done, where I don't know if where they're using Simmons is a product of they believe that is where they can be most successful and he can be most successful, or where Ben Simmons says he wants to play, which is to say initiating offense, having him out at the top of the offense, initiating things. Like, are there different ways that you can use him? Yes, absolutely, and I would do. Be it put him on the elbow, or things where he's comfortable taking those shots, and then maybe the game gets extended. But I think and we heard this even when they drafted him, there's a big part of Ben Simmons, I believe, that wants to be something that he really isn't. And I think until he comes to the realization that, hey, man, this is where you can help us the most, this is where you can be the most successful, I think it's just a give and take. And I think Sixers fans and obviously Brett Brown, you're just going to have to live with some of the shots that he is either going to take and miss, or he just isn't comfortable taking because he doesn't want to look bad.
Chris, I'll ask you just about the difference of playing home and away with the Philadelphia 76ers specifically. We're chatting with Chris Spatola, NBA college analyst, ESPN, SiriusXM as well. Just looking at this team, one, if not the best, record aside, one of the best products you'll see at home on the floor, yet even recently, despite winning a game or two, on the road has been brutal. They're not the only one by any means, but how can a team be so different home and away, specifically this one, but just in general as far as what you've seen in the league itself?
I think it's probably not one thing necessarily in isolation. I think it's probably an aggregate of a lot of things. I would again, the overarching point I would make about winning at home versus on the road is that winning on the road is a habit, is a learned habit. It is something that teams become, that you learn to do that. And I would go back to some of the off the court stuff with the Sixers, the winning on the road. Like, I think what you have to understand, and Philly fans get pissed off when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, this is a team and an organization that is not long from tanking. Now, they have turned themselves into a fringe championship contender, Eastern Conference contending team. But there are still things that, not to use your word, but there are things that have to do with the process that, again, I think the Sixers are still, particularly their young guys, are still learning how to do. And one of those things is winning on the road. One of those things is like dealing with guys like a Jimmy Butler, dealing with locker room distractions. I think it'll come. I mean, look, there are things that the Sixers, that a lot of what they do in the open floor, they're much better defensively at home than they are on the road. Like, there are things that are conducive to winning that they do much better at home than they do on the road. And again, I think some of that's just still a relatively young, not franchise, but a young nucleus that, is still trying to figure some of those things out.
Good stuff here. Chris Spatola here to giving us a little insight on this whole Sixers. They'll play the Wizards tonight and tomorrow, and then the Hawks, and then the Knicks. That sounds like 4 wins right there, right? You got to win these games.
Those. I was just going to say. I mean, hell, let's we'll talk again if they can't beat the Wizards. My God, what a debacle that's become. And the New York is, it's unbelievable.
Terrible.
We love it.
Well, that's coming up tonight, Chris. We appreciate a couple minutes of your time, man. Great stuff.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, boys. Be good.